makers, and welcome to Share Stitchery. I'm Catherine Harris, and today I wanted to do a sew along on how to create a pair of men's modern slim fit dress pants. So the pattern that I decided to use was from Vogue V8890. Now, to be honest, I did make a couple of adjustments on that. My husband has a little bit of a flat bottom, so I had to do a crotch adjustment and a seat adjustment on that. And I also tailored in the legs on this pattern to make them a bit more slim fitting and modern. And I actually didn't crack open the instruction booklet at all from the pattern. Instead, I like to use my tried and true method of pant making, which I learned from David Coffin Page and his book on making trousers for men and women. If you ever want to sew any pants, I highly recommend this book. He also has a course on Blueprint, formerly known as Craftsy, that is phenomenal to watch. So if you have access to that, I would suggest downloading that as well. I use this fantastic pinstripe stretch fabric for the creation of these, and I got it from Minerva. And I absolutely love this. My husband's favorite color is red, and it has a red pinstripe on the inside, so I thought it would be absolutely perfect for him. And then on the inside, I had ran out of lining fabric, so I decided to line this with a performance knit fabric. It was in a nice geometric pattern, which is quintessential to any 1950s style, and I thought that it went perfectly with this pattern. And the fact that it had a wicking property, I really was interested to see how it would turn out on a pair of pants. So if you're ready for the tutorial, let's get started. So to start, you always start with the darts. So this pattern has 2 darts in the back pants. You're going to stitch them as regular and press them flat. Next is the pant front. And I'm laying it on top of my fabric that I'm going to be cutting out. And this is the pattern piece for the front slash pocket that I got from Making Trousers for Men and Women by David Coffin Page. So I'm just lining up the pin stripe on it so it becomes a seamless addition on that slash pocket. So I am pinning it in place and cutting it out. Next, I've put the interfacing on the waistband. You'll notice I have the seam allowances cut out. And then I am going to serge along the pant legs. And you've noticed that I have the crotch protector serged into that as well. And then on the back pieces, I've also serged down there. So the next thing, we are going to get our pant front, and I'm going to check the seam allowance that I put on the pattern that I made after I adjusted it. And I'm going to interface, but I want to make sure that that interfacing is not in the seam allowance because I don't want that additional bulk. So I'm just marking out the seam allowance that I have here. And I believe it's 1.5 centimeters in this case. And then I'm going to put my fusible interfacing down, and I'm going to fuse that to the pants. And next I have the slant front pocket piece that I have actually added in also from David Coffin Page's book, and I'm just making those markings. So I like to start out the pockets with just a rectangle. I find it's the perfect shape to make that pocket. So this is my pocket lining. As I said, it was experimental because it is a knit stretch fabric. It actually turned out quite well. So now that we have it folded right side out and folded in half to create that pocket shape, we are going to stitch from the 2 blue dots. So after you've done that, you are going to press it. And you can use a tailor's press, or I use a wooden block because the steam from your iron actually gets absorbed into the wood, creating a nice crisp press. So a scrap of wood in my backyard worked perfectly. And then I am going to top stitch this. And we've got the start of our front slash pocket. And now you can see the pocket attached, and we're going to fold it in on itself to create that pocket shape. And so we bring it to the side seams. And you see this piece, that is the facing that I had cut out earlier, matching those pinstripes. And I'm going to place it on there and then match the dots that I have. So you can see the blue dots that I've transferred from my pattern. Just making sure that the pinstripes fully line up. And now the first one is then you flip it right sides together, and we're going to stitch the top portion of the pocket. So you know how we stitched from the 2 blue dots, now the upper blue dot up to the waist seam, just along that seam allowance, we're going to stitch that. So once that is done, we can flip the facing. Make sure you press those seam allowances. It will make your life a lot easier. And so what I do with this is I take my little wooden block again. And if you have a tailor's press, by all means do that, but this was free offcut from our backyard. And just press that seam open so it lays nice and flat. Okay, so now we are going to lay the facing on the pocketing fabric so that you have that. So you can see that I have zigzagged the facing on. I did go ahead and serge the outer edge of that facing just so it didn't fray. Not necessarily, but you can do it. And so now we've got the starting of our pocket. So what we need to do now is we need to make sure that we pin this in place. So then we match those blue dots again with our pant front along the facing and pocketing edge. And ensure that that gets pinned nicely in place. And I'm taking my time to really match up these pinstripes because it is a directional print. So I'm going to back tack with a bar tack along the top and bottom, which you can see right here. And you can just see that on the back as well. I used some black thread in my bobbin. So next you're going to take your rotary cutter or scissors and just trim away the excess of the pocket. And so you've got the start of your pocket bag. Now we've got the bottom portion of the pocket. This is also a template I got out of David's book. And you put that about 27 inches down on the pocket bag. I'm just going to trace this out with chalk. It's a rather patterned print and my marker likely won't show up, but this yellow chalk will. I'm just going to get that general shape. When you get the hang of it, you can free eye how you want to have your pocket done. And then you're just going to cut that out. So now you've got the shape of your front pocket. And now I'm going to pin my pocket, just the 2 pocketing pieces, making sure you're not catching the front pant together, because I'm going to take it to the sewing machine. I'm going to stitch along the pocket and then I'm going to serge it. And I also attached it along the side seam as well. And then I back tack it here. I find that that's a great pocket for catching change so that your change doesn't fall out of your pocket when you go to sit down. next on the pant front is I attached and bar tacked the top of the pocket to the top of the pant waistband. That way your pocket stays in place. So do that to both sides of the front. And now we've got the back. So you're just going to see me do the darts. I know I said that that's the first step here. I happen to do the pocket fronts first. So I did a little out of order, but that is quite all right. So I like to match with my pin going front and back, and that way I find I get perfect darts every single time. Always remember, do not back tack at the end of the dart. Make sure you tie that off so it lays nice and flat. And make sure you press it. I use my tailor's clapper / chunk of wood, and I've got some fusible interfacing. So over our welt pockets, whether you're doing a double or a single welt, you always interface on the wrong side of the fabric. So I fused that in, and next I am just using a long strip of fabric that is about 7.5 inches wide and about 14 to 16 inches long. We're going to cut off the excess, so don't worry if you've got something that's a little longer. So match the top edge of the pocket lining to with right sides to wrong sides, or wrong sides to wrong sides, depending on how you want the pockets to look in the end. But match that up to the top. Next, on the right side of your pants, we are going to do a single welt to start. So I have this lining fabric, and you can use any lightweight fabric. You're never going to see this in the welt. It's actually going to fold up and form the top of the welt. If you were doing a double welt pocket, this would be the same fabric as your pants, or whatever color you want the welt to be. So I'm just marking where I have the welt, and then I am drawing the stitching line in there. Next, I am pinning that fabric to the right side of the pants. I'm using a lot of pins because I do not want this to move anywhere. Next, I am going to grab the fabric with right side to right side for the formation of my single welt. So this is the fabric that will be showing when we create the welt. So I'm lining up my stripes on this and pinning those in place. And then I am checking to see how far away from the welt it's going to be. So I'm placing each of the pieces of fabric right on the cutting line, so the middle of the welt. And I'm making sure that I have an equal amount of fabric on either side as I'm stitching that welt. So where the stitching lines are is going to be the width of how wide your welt will be. So once again, I'm going to pin that fabric down so it doesn't go anywhere. I think I was a little excessive on the pins, but you get the point. Next, you're going to drop your stitch length down to about 2 millimeters. Put your needle in exactly at the start on your stitching line and do a couple of stitches. This works as a back tack. If you do go back, you might get your welts all wonky because it's not exactly in the right spot. So to make a good welt, you need to make sure that it is exactly square. So then at the end, I also drop my stitch length again before I cut my threads, and then I do my second row of stitching. Same thing here, drop the stitch length down to 0.2 millimeters, put it back up to 2.5, sew along that stitching line. And if you need to at the end, you can use your hand wheel to get as close as you can to that end point without going over. And then you drop the stitches and cut your threads. And this secures the stitches in place. And now we've got a little bit of a sandwich, so you can see the 2 rows of stitches on the other side. Then we're going to take it over to the iron, and we are going to get that pressed. So we want to press open, and I'm using my tailor clapper to really get that going. Now the knit fabric doesn't like to be pressed very much, but with the clapper, it really helped. And so I'm just using a decent amount of steam here to try to get that to work, but we want to make sure we press those up and out of the way. And so that is the front of our pants. And now I am measuring about 1/2 inch away from the edge of my stitching lines, and I'm creating a V, and this is going to create our ducktails when we do our welt. So I am getting out my rotary cutter as well as my ruler, and I'm going to cut a line from the point of each ducktail, and then we're going to snip off to create these little triangles. And we're going to do that on both sides, making sure that we do not go past that stitching line, that it is exactly there. That's why I'm folding it over. It makes it a little easier to see where the end is. And now is where the magic happens. It's kind of scary. We just cut a hole in our main fabric, but it's okay. That's how we're going to form our welts. And we pop it through to the wrong side. And so what that does is it creates a nice little seam on the outside for us. We're just going to pull it through so that you can see how it's coming out. And taking it over to the iron really helps when we're pulling it through to the wrong side. So this is the wrong side of the fabric. I have pulled out the one welt. I'm just using my tailor's clapper. So I pulled it out, I pressed that stitching line. And then I'm going to flip this one over, and I'm going to pull out the top welt that you don't see. And I'm going to press that and roll the seam allowances a little bit so on this one so that you can see a little bit of the front fabric. Using my tailor's clapper, making sure it's all nice and straight. Keep those ducktails in, so those little triangles, make sure they're still pointing out. We want to keep them there for now. Next part is a little fiddly. So what you're going to do is you're going to create that welt. And so I'm just measuring to make sure that my welt is exactly the size I need it to be. And I'm just rolling it down. And so the seam gauge really comes in handy when you do that. Then you're going to want to press it, give it a lot of steam. I measure again, just because sometimes things shift and move a little bit as we go. And then we're going to press it again. Use our tailor's clapper. And it should be a nice crisp press. And you pull up, and there is the welt. But we're not done yet. So now that we've got that pressed, we need to deal with those little triangle ducktails. So what I am doing here is I like to use just regular old white glue. Make sure it's a glue stick, not the liquid glue. But I take an awl. You could use your finger if you wanted. I just find an awl gives a nice precise point with the glue, and then just press down. You're going to have two layers. You're going to have the layer of your fashion fabric or your pants, as well as the layer of the lining. And you're going to put that down so that it is glued exactly where we want it to be, because we're going to be doing some stitching here, and we want to make sure that they hold in place, and I find glue to be the best. So then we're going to flip the pocket all the way up. And this is the wrong side of our pocket. Welts are all folded where they need to be. What I put in is the pocket facing. So we need to know where we're going to be placing that on the pocket so that when you open up the pocket, you don't see that pocketing fabric, you actually see the pant fabric. So I'm just pinning that to the pocket lining fabric. And I pulled the pocketing all the way up to the waistband because we want to ensure that the pocketing is secured in where we do the waistband. And just a quick caveat, I don't have a grown-on waistband. I do have a sewn-on waistband. So we will have a separate waistband that we'll be inserting later on. So once we get that all pinned, we are going to take that to our sewing machine and sew all around the edges of that. I just zigzagged that on. And this is what your back pockets look like so far. So you've got the layers. And next we are going to pin together the back pocketing fabric, and we're going to stitch it into a pocket. And so I went ahead and I sewed it with my sewing machine, and then I did it on my serger. This is where we get those ducktails. And you're going to take it over to your sewing machine, flip your fashion fabric away and stitch down. And that actually gets those ducktails to stay into the seam. If you did. So now that you've done that, I'm not sure if you can see, but it was very close in the ditch there. And so the last step is making sure that that top welt is never seen again. So we're just going to fold the fashion fabric away. We're actually going to stitch along the top of that, creating a nice little seam there. And then that top fabric, so you can see that went through all the pocketing fabric, and then the top fabric is actually all the way up to the top. Now I'm doing some bar tacks along the side for security. And then you'll also do a tailor's D-tack. So if you ever have any issues with back pockets ripping, it's because there's a lot of strain put in there. Fellows like to put their wallets in there, and the use of a D-tack is to help to take some of that weight so the strain isn't just on the corners, which is where we had cut and slashed the fabric. So it creates a lot more stability with that. You can do it by hand or by machine if you're confident. Also, to quick note, if you're doing the back pockets and you have a label that needs to go on them, make sure you put it on the label before you sew the pockets together. But there is your welt pocket. And now we're going to do the front fly zip. So we're going to put the two fronts right sides together and just matching up the notches that are on the pattern. I use some pins for that. And what we're going to do is we're going to stitch the crotch seam as normal, back stitch where I'm making this blue dot right here. So we're going to stitch all the way up to there, back stitch, and then we're going to switch our stitch length to a long stitch, and then we're going to baste all the way up to the rest of the crotch seam. This helps for the crotch seam in the zipper fly to lay exactly perfectly flat and where you want it to be. So you noticed I back stitched, switching my stitch length here to the highest it'll go, which is 5. And then I'm going to pivot and do all of my upward stitching in that long basting stitch. And we're going to be taking these basting stitches out later. And press open the seams to the fly. Don't forget to interface the fly seam there. Next, you are going to get your fly zipper. Now, I'm always an advocate of metal zippers over plastic zippers. They do last a lot longer. And this is an 8-inch zipper, if you were wondering. And then you're going to place that on the overlap. And getting it all in place. So the zipper teeth you want to be in the center, but slightly to the right. Next, I'm switching from my regular foot to my zipper foot. And you noticed I folded over the top of the fly zipper at the top just to catch those. And I pull down the zipper so that you don't get that bump in the middle. So you want to start off, make sure you backstitch, and that remember to put your stitch length back to a regular 2.5. Put the needle down, lift the presser foot up, and it takes a bit of fiddling, but then pull the zipper back up to the top to continue the stitching. Get that presser foot back down, and then continue your stitching down the line of the zipper. And sewing that to the underlap side and backstitch at the bottom. There you go. So you can see that that is attached. And that's what it looks like from the front. And then I'm going to fold it over. And then I'm going to stitch it once again after it's been folded over. So we need to create an underlap or a fly shield because I haven't already put that on. So this is what this scrap piece of fabric is used for. I want to keep the same shape that I had on the zipper fly for my fly shield as what I have here. I happen to like that shape. And I'm cutting it well below the zipper because we want to have a lot of room to work with. And then just coming up and down. And so this becomes the fly shield. So as I fold it over, we have to get some lining pieces as well. So cut out that same shape for the fly shield in your lining piece. And there's a couple of different methods that you can use. You can stitch these together and then turn them. I find that creates a bit more bulk because you've got some seam allowances. I just like to serge the edges together. It's a lot flatter and looks a lot nicer. So next you're going to lay the zipper fly over top, and on the folded edge that you've already stitched, you are going to stitch another row of stitches about 1/8 of an inch away. So I'm just switching to the other side of my zipper foot, and I put my pins in backwards. Isn't that always the case? Comment down below if you also have issues with putting your pins in backwards when you go to sew, especially on zippers. I find that that's always my problem one. And so this creates some secure stitching down on the zipper as well as attaches the fly shield. Don't forget to backstitch. And then next I am going to serge the edges here, right down along the edge because we don't need any of that excess fabric. So this is what our fly shield looks like right now. It is lined. This side doesn't need to be lined with any other fabric. It's going to lay flat against the body here. And we're going to pull it out so you can see how the fly is starting to come about. So now let's flip the pants right side out. And we're looking at the right side, so you can see where we have our fly here and the zipper. And so I am just going to pin the fly down to the fly shield here on the zipper. And now we are going to stitch it onto the overlap side. So just like on the other side, we're going to fold the tape down so you have a nice clean edge. Using our zipper foot, we are going to stitch it on. Don't forget to back tack. And then stitching close to the edge of the zipper. Stitch down and backstitch at the end. And now the fly is attached to the overlap and the underlap. Next thing I'm doing here is I'm finding where the metal zipper tape stops, and I want to mark that with a pin going through all the layers and through to the outside of the fabric because I need to know where that is. If my needle hits it, I'm going to bust a needle. And I'm making sure that I got all of the layers in. So I flip it right side out, and then with my blue pen I'm making a mark to show you exactly where that is. So I just need to take out the pin now, as we don't want to leave that pin in place. And we're going to fold over the underlap so that it is pulled away to the side because we only want to stitch on the underlap side. So I'm just getting out my quilting ruler, but you can use any ruler you have on hand. And I want to make sure that I am doing this top stitching completely straight. And I'm doing it probably about 1.5 inches from that seam. And then I'm just hand drawing in the curve at the end, making sure that it's just above those metal teeth points with the end of the zipper. So now that we've got that in place, I am going to pin the top of the pants through to the underlap. I'm just pinning away the pocket here because I don't want to stitch through my pocket when I'm doing this. So I'm making sure that I'm only stitching through on the overlap and the main part of the fabric. So I'm actually switching to a regular presser foot instead of a zipper foot because I don't need a zipper foot right now. Do not forget to backstitch at the top here. And just stitch down at your regular 2.5 centimeter stitch length. And go gently around the curve, making sure to follow the lines. Now go slowly here. I am using my hand wheel to do this by hand as opposed to my presser foot. And then once I got to the very edge where I'm in the crease, I'm dropping my stitch length to 0.2 millimeters or 0.02 millimeters. And that's how I'm doing my back stitch because I don't want to go back and forth over that spot because I want it to be exactly where the line meets. So on the inside, that is what it looks like on our fly. And our next step here is to take out our seam ripper and to pull out our basting stitches. And so just quickly pick that out and it reveals your zipper. And your fly is perfectly placed where you need it to be, and it's got a nice overlap, so you won't see that when it's open. Next, I'm going to do a bar tack at the end. If you are working on a pair of jeans, you would do a bar tack at the edge of the corner as well. On dress pants, they don't have that bar tack. And so you can see that I did the bar tack, and what the bar tack also does is it connects the underflap and the overflap together so that they are one piece. Now I'm going to trim off the extra little teeth on the zipper. I'm just using a pair of old utility scissors, so do not use fabric scissors or your paper scissors. If you do have some tools handy, you can pull off the end bits of the zipper with the tools. I didn't have any of those handy, so I just used my scissors. And this is what it looks like with the pocketing fabric and all of the underlaps for your zipper fly. Next up, we have the pant legs is what we're going to put together next. So on the back side of the pants, we're going to do the side seam. So take your right facing on the back of your pants and the front of your pants together. And make sure you press open those seams. You'll notice I have a wider seam allowance in this, so that is traditional in most pant making because it allows you to take the pants in and out. So next I have the waistband. So I have two waistband pieces, one for the left and one for the right, and it does have an overlap for putting on the buckle closures. So I want to ensure that with the way that it's folding over, so I've got a grown-on facing for what I chose to do for my waistband, and then I double fold over the lining fabric for the waistband, and I'm pinning all of this to the top of the waistband. So I had just cut out my lining fabric in a giant strip, and I'm just trimming off the excess. And so this is the opposite side here. And once it's all stitched together, we are going to flip it right side out. Now, one thing to note, when you are flipping out the corners, you need to make sure that you clip and trim the edges. So So now we have a clean folded edge on the bottom of the lining, and then on the bottom of our main fabric that will be attaching to the waistband of our pant, that is our raw edge. So now this is for the overflap. And so in hindsight, I would make it half the size I just made it there. So I would say doing it at 1.5 inches, that's probably closer to 3.5 or 4 inches. It's a little big. It's functional, it works, but aesthetically, I should have made it a little shorter. But what I was doing with this piece is I'm actually going to attach it on as a facing, because when you're buckling it up, you don't want to see the underside of our lining fabric. You want it to be the fashion fabric, so that fabric of the pants here. I'm just transferring my markings onto both sides here, and so that is where I'm going to turn it over, because I need to know where my stitches are going to go to, because we are going to stitch all the way around on the end of this. So we're going to leave the bottom open on the lining side, but where I drew that mark and along the diagonal, I'm going to stitch all the way around, so you can follow my finger up and then to the bottom. We're just going to cut off the excess of my lining fabric here. So now that I've got that stitched, we are going to clip these corners. Very crucial to be able to get a nice turn on this. And then make sure you clip your notches, and that's right where the stitching line is. And then we can go and push that out, and if you need to get a dowel or a chopstick to go in and point the corners out, you can. I'm just trimming off a little more of that fabric along the bottom to get a crisper turn. And don't forget to make sure you take it to the pressing board and press this, and use your tailor's clapper on it. It will give the most crisp and beautiful press. And so the way that I had the interfacing with the seam allowance, you should be stitching right along that interfacing, which will also give a nice crisp turn when you do press it. So those are the two waistband pieces that I drafted out. And now we are going to attach them. So we've got two pieces. We've got a front and a back right and a front and a back left. Make sure you're attaching the right pieces in order. So you've got one is an underlap and one is an overlap. So the overlap is the one that we did that will hold the tops of the buttons. And so just going through the one layer on the waistband and the entire pant waistband that we had already put together through the pocketing layers and everything, and just get that all pinned in place. So once you have the right side, you move on to the left side and do the exact same thing. And now we have the waistband sewn on. And so you can see that you have the nice flaps that are coming out exactly where they need to be. And right here, I am just creating a little notch so that I can turn it a little bit better. You can see that it comes out nicely there. Next, I decided to do the button loops. And so you basically just stitch a tube, and then I like to take a pin, clip it to the one side, and just like feed it through to the other end. Another way you can do this is if you have a cover stitch machine, you can just fold them and then stitch right down. It saves you a ton of time, but alas, I cannot afford a cover stitch machine quite yet. Hopefully sometime in my future. And it is all turned out. Take the pin off and then take it to the iron and get it pressed nice and flat. And then what I did is I stitched on either end just to secure that so it's nice and flat. It also adds a bit of a decorative touch to it. Next, you are going to cut off your strips, and they are going to be about 4 inches long. And you should end up with about 6 or 7 of them after everything's all said and done. And save those for later. Because right now we need to stitch these pants together so they look a little bit more like pants. So we're going to work on the crotch seam here. So I am just matching up the seams at the crotch. And I'm pinning to make sure everything looks good. And then I'm doing the inseam going down the leg. And then once that is all stitched, make sure you press it, and it should look a little something like this. Now, your butt is not stitched yet. And how we do this is we magically turn out one of the pant legs right side out and put it inside the other pant leg. It reminds me a bit of a burrito or fabric origami. And then we can do the seat seam along your buttocks and having that go down. Now, one thing to note when you are drafting pants for yourself or someone else, when you do that at the top, you typically have a larger seam allowance to allow for adjustments if you gain or lose weight. So just make sure that when you stitch it, it is higher at the top. So you can see mine goes higher at the top, and then it narrows to my traditional seam allowance along the crotch area. So just make sure you include that in your calculations when you're drafting out your pattern and working on your muslin. So the next thing I'm doing here is I am pinning the lining of the waistband down because I want to make sure going all across it looks well. Because what I'm going to be doing next is I am going to be hand stitching and tacking down the waistband. So I'm just using a ladder stitch. If you would like a more in-depth tutorial on a ladder stitch, just let me know in the comments down below. I'd be happy to do one in real time without it sped up, so that you can see how to create an invisible stitch that you can't see that is also quite secure. So I am only attaching it in the instances where there is a piece of lining for me to attach it to, because I do not want my stitches to ever show on the exterior fashion fabric. So I just do a running stitch in between and then attach it on the other portion. So these pants are really starting to come together and starting to look a lot like pants. And we can go and grab our button loop belt holders and begin to attach those now. So you want to start by putting right side to right side and attaching it on the top. What we're going to be doing here is we're going to be stitching the belt loops on along the top here. The next one is positioned halfway in between the pockets, so one on the center back side seam. One is in the middle of your back pockets. So if you're wondering where the heck am I supposed to place them, that is how you tell. And then you're going to want to place one on the side seams. And I'm just finding the middle of my fabric or of my pants here. And I'm making it 4 inches from the center front on the front belt loops. And that's on either side. I'm just double checking my measurements and then going and doing 4 inches on the other side here. And now I'm attaching the ones right on the side seams. And now that we've got them all stitched up, what you're going to do next is you're going to fold them over. I like to use an iron just to get them pressed quite nicely, and then you're going to use a bar tack stitch to stitch the tops of these down. Now this is an optional process. You don't need to do the bar tack. I like to do it for a little extra security. Next, you are going to attach along the bottom, and then I do a bar tack on the ends. And so what this ends up doing as well is those bar tacks and the stitching of the belt loops on actually tacks on that waistband. So if you are in a hurry and the pants are for yourself and maybe not a client, or you don't want to make them too special, you don't need to do that hand stitching. You could go in and just use those bar tacks. Now for the hemming, traditional blind hem here, turn it up 2 inches and then press it and flip it over one more time so that we are stitching only on the edge of that fabric and then just catching in on the fold here. And so I use a blind hem foot. If I was doing a pair of couture pants, I would do this by hand just because I'd have a bit more precise detailing that could go into some of those stitches. But for this pair of pants, they're an everyday work pants for my husband. The blind hem foot works very well. Make sure you're using the right stitch. So it's one that takes a couple of stitches on your fabric and then does a bit of a zigzag on one stitch onto the other one. And the foot is the one that has a little bar on it. Give it a nice good press with some steam and those stitches pretty much disappear. So next I am attaching the crotch cover from the top of the fly to the seat, and it's the exact same shape that I had used on the crotch fly that I had sewn in on the side seams of the front of the pants. This one though, we are going to cut it out and then I'm going to stitch it together, and you just need a single layer of fabric. And so with this, I just serged the right sides together and then serged around the entire outside. So here you see that I'm putting right sides together, and I'm pinning it because I don't want it to slip. This jersey fabric is a little bit slippery and it is a knit. So I have that all stitched up so you can see it stitched and pressed. Always press. And then I am going to hand stitch that in place. So this creates an additional comfort for the individual who's wearing it. Well, there you have it. A pair of modern fit dress pants that I had made for my husband and that you can make for yourself. You can transfer some of these skills to making some dress pants for ladies or potentially one of your loved ones. If you have any questions about how I altered the pattern or adjusted some of the fit issues that you have in pants, I would be delighted to do a video on that. Just leave the comments in the description down below so that I know what you're interested in seeing. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing and hitting that big like button if you enjoyed this video. Until next time, makers, let's get our sewspiration on.